funded by the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland with the television licence fee.
You're listening to Programme 3 of the three-part series, Making a Difference. Over the years, many Irish missionary women have done Trojan work in various faraway lands. And this is a few of their stories.
The job of a missionary is to be with people and to listen to where they are, to lead them to be the best people they can be.
That has been our passion as missionaries, to enable the local people.
I really wanted to do something for other people, and I wanted to do something outside of Ireland.
It was what we could do for the people and what they could do for themselves after that.
I thought I would like to do something for other women in other countries.
Motivation is just that the need of others pulled at my heartstrings, and I was happy and free to go.
Shortly after qualifying as a nurse, Sister Jo McDermott of the Columban Missionary Sisters went to Korea in 1967. So just what kind of work did she do there?
Well, in those years we had institutions. It was hospitals and clinics, and we were totally into medical work, but education within medical work. We had a nursing school to train nurses because we needed to train nurses ourselves and have them to a standard that we were satisfied with. And so that was the field in which I worked. It was general nursing and also maternity nursing. So I came back in 1974 to do my midwifery training in the National Maternity Hospital in Dublin. So then mostly our work was, as I said, clinical, and one day, people coming and going the same day to see the doctor and getting their tests done. And in fact, they got a very good service because the laboratory tests and x-rays would be done that day. And if they waited around for a few hours, they got results that day and got their medicines that same day. We were in a port city, and people came from the islands. There were hundreds of islands dotted around the coast, and people came in with very, very bad conditions, and often they had already been treated locally, and ours was a second line or third line port of call, so that they were often in a very bad state. And things like amoebic dysentery, and that was endemic in that part of the world, and people died from it. They died from the effects of cancer of the liver was the worst side of it, and also TB was very rampant. I remember the first time in Korea seeing a television. It was loaned to us by the Archbishop to see the landing on the moon. And
1969.
So I hadn't seen any television while I was in the novitiate either, and it wasn't a common thing. Actually, that day, seeing the landing on the moon, I never saw the landing on the moon because there was a man brought in who had had a stab wound from somebody crazy who had stabbed him with a knife, and he came in as an emergency, so we had to open the operating theatre up and call in the surgeon, and so the landing of the moon happened without my seeing it.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I learned a great deal from my years there. I was 22 years in Korea.
And after her time in Korea, Jo McDermott subsequently went on the missions to Pakistan in 1990. So how much of a culture shock was it?
It was like having been totally cut off from all that was familiar and comfortable, and I felt really at sea. It was very, very difficult at the beginning. And again, it was straight into language. Well, we had 1 month of seeing around. The area that we knew we were going to was Sindh, the province of Sindh. There was the diocese of Hyderabad, and we decided that we would confine ourselves to that diocese because that was where we decided that we would be. And we had a very strict writ in that our visas said we would work with the Christian communities of Hyderabad diocese. That meant no proselytizing, which was, of course, an order from the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. That is the condition on which you're allowed entry there. So that is what we did. The people whom we were dealing with, at least and where we lived, were of the lower caste and illiterate, highly illiterate. The literacy rate that time in 1990 was considered to be about 22 or 23%. I think the WHO would describe literacy as to be able to read an instruction, carry out that instruction, and write a short report on what you had done. Well, taking that as literacy, it was probably much, much lower than that.
So in other words, sister, there was chronic illiteracy and I'd say a lot of poverty underground. Would I be right?
Yes, a lot of poverty. Mostly in that the people were kept down. It seems to be institutionalized. It's just that the landowners need labourers, and if labourers are educated, they'll move away from the land. So they need the people to work the land for them. And so women and men worked the land very much, crops, and they were part of the system, you know, the big landlord and the people working it. Many of them indentured labourers and sometimes jailed by their own landlords. One of the things which I think was a big help was education. We went into education quite a bit in Sindh and in village schools, and also we worked with two different types of people. One were the Punjabi people, who were the people who did the cleaning, the sanitation work, and the people who were farmhands. And then there were the Parkrikoli tribal people, and they worked practically all on the land as indentured labourers. So to get these two people to live together as a Christian community was one of the main thrusts of our time there. And the schools we had catered for both, and they went to school together and they went to church together, and by and large they mixed. They wouldn't intermarry, but they would mix quite well, and even, you know, eating and drinking and all that there's a very definite code of ethics about that. And finally, you know, over the years, these two people of these two different tribes could sit down together and have a meal together. In my 20 plus years in Pakistan, well, I was there 27 years, not present all those years, but from 1990 until 2017, I would have seen families who were totally illiterate, and then because the Catholic Church in our parish and in many parishes opened a school for children, and they reluctantly went there. The parents didn't really want it because they were more useful at home for looking after the other children and doing messages and going out to collect wood and bringing the buffalo for a bath and all the things that have to be done around their own families. So
practical survival issues.
And they were missed at home. So they felt that they were doing us a compliment by sending their children to school. But the children valued it themselves and liked it, but of course at any reason at all they would be kept at home, and absenteeism would be quite regular. But then in the generations, to see now, third generation, that it's a natural thing for the children to go to school. These children, their parents have already come out of our schools, and so those children will go quite willingly to school, and the attendance is much better. And now they will be able to do anything, and many of them in turn are now the teachers in our schools.
And veering away from Asia and turning our attention to Africa. In 1957, Sister Teresa Raftery of the Franciscan Missionary Sisters for Africa went on the missions to Kenya. She taught in a secondary school there as well as helping to run that school. So what subjects did Teresa teach?
When I went there, I taught English language and literature, because we had other sisters on the team and they would take the religion education and so on. Then after some years we had to get in science into the programme and so on. So that's how we were able to build, through people who have given us money, build the science labs and domestic science and so on, and have a variety. I also was able to build 2 dormitories as well to keep and an extra classroom and so on. This was wonderful to be able to do all of that. I remember this particular book. It was recommended, of course, by the Ministry of Education, and for literature it was called Things Fall Apart, written by, it was a Nigerian or whatever, and it was very, very humorous altogether. So years later, some of the teachers would say to me, "Sister, things are falling apart."
In other words, we're running the school and it ain't easy, and it's always an uphill struggle. But we keep beavering away.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. No. It's just wonderful. No, I had no problems whatsoever in teaching, because I just said, no, we have to cover this now in the 35 minutes that we have. So let's do it, so that I'm not keeping the other teachers from coming in and so on. So we worked well together, and I was so happy. I think it was my last time I was there, and so many students got A's in their English language, and I was so happy. I was very happy about that, and they worked hard to get it. And that particular time was always very good at English, very good, and they liked it. For sure, they liked it, yes. Because I said, no, okay, your own tribal language, it's okay for here, but if you go over anywhere else, you need something else. So they picked it up very quickly. And you see, they would have started very early down in the lower primary. So the little ones would do that,
So just how long did Teresa work in secondary education in Kenya?
I was in the secondary from 70s until late 80s. So I did my bit there, and that was when I decided then that we were allowed to have further education. So that's when I went to Brighton, Massachusetts, and I was able to do a master's degree there, again in religious and so on. And that was how I was able, had more confidence, if you like, to go back and to be able to facilitate teachers. So I was very happy with that.
So you were literally training the trainers, so to speak.
Yeah, well, exactly. And they were so happy. And then when I brought in the Education for Life programme, or behaviour change it was called at the time, and they were very happy with that as well.
And but this was dealing now with, by this stage, the AIDS epidemic had devastated huge parts of Africa, especially Kenya. And this was what you were dealing with. This Education for Life was about, prevention as opposed to having to deal with the awful scenario thereafter.
Absolutely. And I used the manual that this Sister Kay Lawler put together, and Sister Miriam had taken it up as well, and she was doing it in Uganda.
And as was just touched on, the Education for Life programme was begun by various missionary sisters in order to address the HIV/AIDS pandemic devastating Africa, as well as to try educate young people to make value-based life decisions, so that they wouldn't fall victim to AIDS. Teresa Raftery.
It was a lengthy programme that we could not do it, so I had to, cut it down a little bit so that it fits in, and still you still give them the main information, Okay, but then when I had to take it out to the schools, my goodness, and I was alarmed. One time I went into this school to ask the head teacher. I told him what we were doing, and I said, if you'd like, we could come here to talk to your top class of your standard 8 at the time. And he looked at me, and I said to myself, I have lost the plot. He doesn't want me. And instead of that, he said, Sister, not only do I want you for standard 8, I want you for standard 7, 6 and 5. I nearly fell off the chair. He said, I'm telling you, these children are exposed to pornographic stuff. All right, they mightn't have shoes on their feet, but they might have a shilling to go into these wooden places where they're showing these films. So we spent 2 or 3 days in that school by his permission, and he was so happy, very, very happy. But to hear the children, why do you engage in sex? And it's amazing. Some would say, well, girls were made for boys. You see, we would do it, they would go into groups, which we did, of course, with the teachers as well. You put them into groups, and boys separate and girls separate and so on. Give them the same questions, and then they write up the answers on newsprint, and you bring them all back to the classroom and so on. So this was one of the answers. It was very interesting, wasn't it? So that's how they are. But then another one which I took out of the manual was, what will Kenya look like in 10 years' time if we don't change our behaviour? And we said they had to do it in no words, just draw. What do you think?
Draw an image of what you think the future the prognosis will be 10 years' time if we don't change current behaviours.
And they were very enlightening. And one was that schools would be empty.
I mean, that's how devastating, because we were just shooting the breeze earlier on, Sister, over a cup of tea, and you were saying that it was unbelievable. I mean, the situation back in those heady days. I mean, AIDS was just devastating the population.
That's right. Dreadful. And that would be one. And then they would draw one of the cemetery. And just, empty schools, half-empty churches or whatever, families left, orphans, and so on and so on. And they did that artistically, for sure, and it was just wonderful. And
Sister, students that you were teaching these courses to about education for life and preventing death, basically, by AIDS, about the 12 or thereabouts, am I right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Many of the teachers would say, yes, what you're doing is correct. And it's very, very important in today's world. Definitely. A number of the teachers would say it. Please, continue. And another teacher said, Sister, when can you bring this programme up to Western Kenya? I said, I've no time. I'm so
flat out
up here in Nairobi because it's non-stopped. And, in one year we had a bumper harvest in the schools alone. We ended up with something like 5,000 children that we did day after day after day, right? And then, of course, with the teachers then at the weekend, we would do those. But that was a bumper harvest, I tell you, one year. It was wonderful, be able to send that to my benefactors, that we're doing something, and we're many people are taking it on board.
Oh, Sister, when you were doing the Education for Life, it wasn't just, it was all schools, all creeds. It didn't matter. It was getting the message out there. Right. I mean, you were saying as well, you visited a lot of Muslim schools, am I correct?
Yes, indeed. In certain schools in Nairobi, yes, definitely. Definitely there would be, yes. And I would always begin by saying, now, okay, we'll pray. We're from the Catholic Church. We pray according to that. I said, if there's a Muslim up here, that person can also pray according to the Muslim tradition. Remember that we are all children of the same God. So let us be together in this fight against this thing that is devastating families. Look at the little orphans that are left. The parents die because of HIV and so on. And who's looking after them? I know of a mother in Uganda who has now to look after her grandchildren. And it's terrible. And she's very old.
Because the parents are dead because of AIDS.
Parents are dead because of this.
Getting back to Asia once more, In 1973, Sister Isabel Lockery of the Columban Missionary Sisters arrived into Hong Kong, which was then a British Crown colony and booming economically. So was it much of a culture shock?
The crowds, I suppose, that were a little bit daunting at the beginning, and the lack of space and the heat. I just remember standing in the humidity, and that was difficult at the beginning.
And after getting to Hong Kong, Isabel's mission was to help establish a school in the city's Kowloon area, which had its own fair share of problems.
Just the July before I left, there was a mudslide just where our school was supposed to be, and 30 people died in that mudslide. And then there was an effort to better housing, but when we went there, people were living just in one room. That was literally their living quarters. They had along the corridors, which was a 7-storey building, I remember. Along the corridors, they would do their cooking and public toilets at the end of the corridors. But it always amazed me how the children came to school spotless and how eager their parents were for education. And I began to realise, that hunger, there are many different kinds of hunger in our world today, and for them it was education. And the parents had not received education, so when they would come to the school it was using their thumbprint or an X just to sign their names, but so eager that their girls would get a good education.
Sister, was it a primary school or a secondary school that you actually had established now?
That was a secondary school, and it was all the children from that area. They would have been poor. I still have memories of one girl coming in to pay her fees for school, and she just took up her pocket and emptied it out on the desk. But she was a very happy girl, and I realised her mother was a hawker, and a hawker was that she had a barrow and would be selling bits of clothing or food or fruit or something like that. But, she could laugh at that, and she was proud, and her mother would be so happy that she was receiving education. So they worked really hard. I think there's a real hard-working ethos among the Chinese, that they will do anything to get their children educated.
It must have been a huge learning curve for yourself, and also inspirational as well.
It was very inspirational, and very inspirational just to see how the children could stick at it, and they had very little space at home, but so they would stay on very often in the school grounds, and we gave a place for them to do their studies to help them out,
And Isabel taught in that school in Kowloon for several years, before moving on to other work. Years later, before departing Hong Kong for good, she attended a joyous reunion with her old students from that school.
When we were leaving the last time, I was very struck by we were invited back for a party in the school, and we had the girls there who were our first year students. They're now in their 50s. And we had great memories to share. But something that really excited me was that 2 of the girls had started a project, and it was a scholarship for poor children. And they launched it that night, But they remembered. So we had them for lunch afterwards, and they shared their story, that we had a little chapel up on the 7th floor. They were not Catholics at the time, but they used to go up there for quiet and to cry sometimes because their parents wanted them to finish their education and to start work. But somehow we encouraged them to stay on and got a scholarship for them. And both of them are now working, and one in a school for disadvantaged children and doing marvellous work. So it was just so happy to see them, how they had got on themselves, but that they never forgot where they came from, and they were reaching out to others now in their own way.
That's fantastic. So in other words, the wheel coming full circle, and it's not just about myself, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely not. It's a great pleasure just to meet some of them now and to see where education has brought them. And I think it's more their sense of care for other people and their great sense of gratitude for what they themselves had received.
It must be good job satisfaction for yourself, Sister Isabel, that you know that this is where it's at. This is the real results, so to speak. It's not about buildings. It's not about what's on the paper. It's about people.
Yes, it's about people. I think it's about people. I remembered one girl there, and I was looking out for her that night because I remembered as a student, I brought a group of them out to an orphanage. And they didn't have much money themselves, so I didn't ask that they would bring anything, a toy that was new, but to bring something they had and to share it with somebody else. So I just remember this little girl, and she had a lovely doll. I don't know where she got it, but I could see she was very attached to this. But there was one little girl out there who obviously had a lot of fears. I think she had been beaten, and so she didn't mix with anybody for a long time. But I kept watching, and I saw this little one eventually making friends and handing over her doll. So I just remember the joy in that little person's life, and somehow for the first time maybe she was able to make contact with somebody. So to meet that past pupil that day and to remember, that was so many years ago, maybe 40 years ago, the lovely memory that stayed with her also.
Wow, yeah. That's a great story, and it's true. That's the thing about it.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, and it kind of, in a way, we were talking about this earlier on. It's not the big things sometimes. It's just a small little thing that barriers are broken down and that human people develop the best of human nature, so to speak.
Yes. I suppose that's what I realised, that mission happens not in what we plan to do, but in the little things that happen in daily life also.
Now, over the last 2 programmes in this series, we've heard several missionary sisters tell their stories. However, their stories represent just a drop in the ocean of the thousands of untold stories of many Irish women who, down the decades, gave their lives, their youth, sacrificed everything to help those in need who crossed their path.
I enjoyed my work. It was difficult at times. It was hard work. The poverty really was difficult.
There was always hope in my heart. And I think when you share hope with people, that gives an awful lot. And when you help somebody...
I certainly received more than I gave.
My memories are of life lived to the full, If I was young now, I think I would love to start it all over again. I really would. It was good.
Funded by the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland with the television licence fee.